The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our guest chaplain, Dr. Gary G. Dole, Faith Baptist Church, Altoona, Pennsylvania.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father and God, we thank you for receiving us through the work of your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, on the cross. We also thank you for the many blessings you have showered upon this great nation. Today, I thank you for those you have brought into this great chamber to represent the citizens of our country and to advance the American ethic laid firm by the faith of our founders. May you guide, direct, enable, and strengthen Speaker Johnson and each member of this body in the path of unity that will bring lasting peace and prosperity to this nation we all love. I pray that by your grace, you will enlighten each representative with your wisdom that will maintain America as a bastion for peace and freedom around the world for generations to come. These things I pray in the name of your Son and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Steen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Joyce, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce the pastor of the Faith Baptist Church of Altoona, Pennsylvania, and the president of the Way of Truth Ministries, Pastor Gary Dole. Pastor Dole has been preaching the gospel since he was 12 years old, and by the time he was a senior at the Washington Bible College, Pastor Dole was already preaching at the Morningside Baptist Church in Suitland, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. Since then, Pastor Dole has had an incredible life. He has served at 4 churches in Pennsylvania and Florida and is currently in his 29th year as the pastor of the Faith Baptist Church of Altoona. Pastor Dole also founded the Way of Truth Ministries, which has missionaries on 3 continents. Pastor Dole has evangelized by preaching the gospel and serving those in need in 25 different countries. Pastor Dole has devoted his life to spreading the word of the Lord and serving those less fortunate. Whether in his community or throughout the world, he has embodied the selfless service of Jesus Christ, his Savior. It is a privilege to welcome Pastor Gary Dole and his wife of 50 years, Nancy, to Washington to open the floor of the United States House of Representatives in prayer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition? Without objection, and the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in recognition of National Homeownership Month, a time to celebrate the cornerstone of the American dream. For generations, owning a home has symbolized stability, independence, and opportunity. It strengthens families, builds communities, and lays the foundation for long-term financial security. But today, that dream feels out of reach for too many, especially first-time buyers, young families, and those in rural and working-class communities. Rising interest rates, limited housing supply, and increasing costs are making it harder for Americans to put down roots. That's why we must work together across the aisle to support policies that expand access to affordable housing, invest in infrastructure, and reduce regulatory barriers that drive up costs. Home ownership shouldn't be a luxury. It should be an achievable goal for every hardworking American. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United States airstrikes in Iran, which we hope to be briefed on today, is the latest in the signature chaos and erratic decision-making from the Trump White House. I thank God our extraordinary military appears to have exquisitely executed its mission. We can be grateful to our military's carrying out of a decision while asking questions about that decision. Yet, while the news is inundated with reports of Trump's airstrikes, there are many concerns we are not hearing about here at home. Hostages, Ukraine, federal institutions like USAID and the NIH gutted, the big ugly bill that would slash Medicaid for 14 million Americans, including 110,000 of my constituents, the cruel cuts at SAMHSA that will jeopardize the lives of those struggling with addiction and mental health. The Trump White House leads with smoke and mirrors, but they are doing incredible harm to my constituents and to Americans across this country. I call upon my colleagues to not let them be successful in their attempts to obscure and distract. Jefferson said, when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. Resist. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor an extraordinary American and a proud son of South Mississippi, Lieutenant Colonel Boyd Mason, for his nearly 3 decades of distinguished service to our country. Lieutenant Colonel Mason served with courage and honor, including 2.5 years doing active duty in Vietnam War. His dedication to our nation didn't end with his military service. He continues to be a guiding light in Jackson County and all across South Mississippi's 4th Congressional District. Today, Mr. Mason faces a new battle. Battle this time is a personal one, fight against cancer. Yet his strength and spirit remain unshaken. He is a devoted father of 5, grandfather to 12, great-grandfather to 5 more. His legacy of service, faith, and perseverance reaches far beyond the battlefield. It lives on in the lives touched and the freedoms he helped defend. While our military members risk their lives every day for the sake of our great country, it's more important than ever to honor those who answered the call. Lieutenant Colonel Mason is a hero, plain and simple, and I ask all Americans to join me in keeping him and his family in our thoughts and prayers. And Mr. Speaker, we honor Lieutenant Colonel Mason today. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to advise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize John Walston, affectionately known as Bus Dad. After an impressive 51 years behind the wheel of a school bus dedicated to transporting exceptional children within Wilson County Public Schools, Mr. Walston has recently entered a well-deserved retirement. Mr. Walston was more than just a school bus driver. He was devoted to his students and their families. He warmly welcomed each child on his bus every morning, making sure they were ready for school. His bus was more than just a mode of transportation, it was a safe haven. Mr. Walston's dedication exemplifies a great American story, highlighting the essence of public service: impactful, consistent, and full of love and compassion. Mr. Walston, thank you for your extraordinary commitment to your students over the decades. Your legacy will remain with those you've touched, and we wish you a wonderful retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, to address the body for 1 minute without objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to once again stress the need for immigration reform in this country. Just last week, back home, one of my taxpayer constituents, Narciso Barranco, was picked up by, I believe, our ICE agents. They were masked, and is now sitting in an ICE facility, holding facility in Los Angeles. Videos show him punched by masked federal agents unprovoked. He's lived in my district for 25 years or more, and not a traffic ticket to his name. More importantly, he has three sons, all serving in the U.S. Marine Corps. You know, we make movies of families like this. 3 sons ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for this great nation, and instead he's being held in custody in an ICE facility in Los Angeles. Our federal agents should be taking criminals off our streets, not gentlemen like this. I pray that Mr. Barranco's case is a wake-up call for all of us for immigration reform. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
I ask to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today for the 26th time to call on the Trump administration to honor its word and restore funding for life-saving food aid around the world. You know, the words from the Trump administration have been pretty good on this. Elon Musk said that funding for emergency food aid will be restored. Marco Rubio has repeatedly said he was going to do it. They even got Fox News to write a glowing online article about their plans to restore funding. But it's been 6 months since they cut this funding off. 6 months. And every day that they wait is another day that children die of starvation unnecessarily. Every day, there are children whose organs are shutting down, who are unable to eat conventional food and can only have their lives saved by ready-to-use therapeutic food manufactured in the United States. Every day, the clock is ticking. The administration needs to do what it said it's going to do, restore funding for this aid, and I will continue to stand on this floor every day until they do. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair lays before the House the following enrolled bill.
H.R. 2215, an act to redesignate the Salem Maritime National Historic Site as the Salem Maritime National Historic Park and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 530, I call up House Resolution 516 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 516, resolution condemning the violent June 2025 riots in Los Angeles, California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 530, the resolution is considered read. The resolution shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Judiciary or their respective designees. The gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to insert extraneous material on House Resolution 516.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
A couple weeks ago, the entire world witnessed horrifying scenes out of Los Angeles. Molotov cocktails and bricks being thrown at officers, Waymo cars being lit on fire, American flags being burned, roadways being blocked. Today, we will stand as a House to condemn these acts of violence and to condemn the irresponsible politicians who refused to adequately address them. I think it's important to understand from the beginning the events leading to these horrific scenes. We should first recognize that ICE was undertaking operations in Los Angeles that have been very standard across administrations, Democrat or Republican. President Obama, after all, carried out millions of deportations. And the priority has always been to focus on those who have a criminal record and who pose a risk to the public. That is precisely what ICE was doing in Los Angeles. Among those targeted were murderers, pedophiles, and drug traffickers. It should also be recognized that one of the reasons that some of these people had to be sought out in the community is that the city of Los Angeles and the state of California have chosen to enact sanctuary policies that explicitly forbid ICE from taking custody of these dangerous individuals in the safest and least disruptive setting, in a custodial setting, that is, in jails. That is the explicit purpose of our sanctuary laws. So despite these facts, as these operations were being carried out in a standard and targeted way in Los Angeles, you had certain politicians who engaged in inflammatory rhetoric, and you then had individuals gather to disrupt the activities of ICE and our federal officers, and then you saw these extreme and horrifying acts of violence. Now, I want to be very clear. I will defend in any way that I can the right to assemble and protest, regardless of the content of what the protesters are advocating. This is foundational. It is fundamental to the American system of government. But violence is another matter entirely. This is not just a matter of protest crossing a line. Violence is the antithesis of protest. It seeks to shut down the process of deliberation, argument, and debate. It seeks to exalt force over reason. It is an abandonment of the American experiment of self-government. And by the way, this is especially true when the very purpose of the violence is to impede the policies of a duly elected president from being carried out. It is to say that a violent agitator should be able to overthrow, through force, the will of a democratic majority that has been established through a democratic, free, and fair election. That is what we bore witness to in Los Angeles. And yet, instead of doing everything possible to restore order, to protect the citizens of Los Angeles, to protect our law enforcement officers and our federal officers, you saw certain irresponsible, vainglorious politicians in California decide that this was their star-making moment, where they would egg on the violent agitators, where they would try to pick a fight in every way they could with the president, even going so far as to file a frivolous lawsuit that was thrown out unanimously by the Ninth Circuit. And worst of all, these politicians decided to place the blame for the violence on our incredible National Guard members, somehow saying it was their presence there that caused it. This is deeply offensive, and our National Guard members are owed an apology. So today, I hope that we can stand together, Republicans and Democrats, in making it very clear that protest and assembly are fundamental rights in this country, and that acts of violence are a grave threat to those rights. Specifically, this resolution recognizes the right to assemble and protest peacefully, condemns unequivocally the violence perpetrated against federal, state, and local law enforcement, calls on local and state elected leadership to work with the federal government to end the violent riots and restore peace, and expresses gratitude to law enforcement officers, including the Los Angeles Police Department, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, California Highway Patrol, Orange County Sheriff's Department, and other local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, including the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, for keeping our communities safe in the face of danger. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as she might consume to the chair of the California Democratic delegation, Ms. Lofgren, who leads the 45 Democrats in the California delegation.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I oppose the Kim resolution. Now, had it just condemned violence and thanked the National Guard and the Marines who did not ask for this assignment, I think we'd all be on board. Instead, the resolution really is engaging in partisan games with misleading and inflammatory provisions. You know, Trump said he was going to go arrest and deport violent criminals. People are okay with that. Instead, armed, masked ICE agents, some refusing to identify themselves, aggressively and in some cases even violently, took down day workers at Home Depot, busboys, gardeners, a union leader. And regular people in Los Angeles objected to that. And as the First Amendment provides, they peacefully protested against it. Unfortunately, there were some hooligans and rowdies who infiltrated that group, and they committed violent acts and vandalism, and for that, they should be prosecuted. They should be brought to justice and condemned, which we do. However, the resolution really creates a misleading picture of what happened. On the first page, it says, whereas these protests quickly escalated into violent riots across Los Angeles, where acts of arson, widespread looting, property destruction, lighting streets on fire. Well, the fact is that these demonstrations were largely confined to about a 10-block area of downtown Los Angeles. The police, LAPD, had the situation under control, and there's an elaborate system of mutual aid in California. Had they needed additional forces, it was readily available under mutual aid. I would like to point out to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, in case they need a reminder, LA County is 4,060 miles, square miles, not the 10 blocks. So when President Trump deployed the Marines and National Guard in LA, it was not at the request of local officials, the chief of police or the governor. It was unprecedented, unnecessary, and a clear attempt to take over the state's law enforcement authority. In fact, I think it did aggravate tensions in the area. Now, the National Guard remains in Los Angeles to this day. They have nothing to do. We heard a report from the former commander that less than 20% are doing anything, and they've been taken away from jobs where they were needed. For example, helping in efforts to prevent forest fire prevention and the like. You know, as the elected chair of the California Democratic delegation, I was proud to join my colleague, Ms. Barragan, in introducing a resolution that, unlike this one, is based in fact. Our resolution condemns the president's authoritarian response to First Amendment expressions of dissent. Unlike the Kim resolution, it expresses support for law enforcement and for the National Guard and for the Marines, and it condemns violence by those who committed it. Now, why is this important? You know, in the resolution, it's so partisan. It says, whereas California's leadership has prioritized protecting illegal immigrants and violent individuals over United States citizens. That is absurd. That is insulting to our elected officials, but it's right in keeping with what the president has said. He has indicated publicly he intends to target cities and states that are democratically elected, that have Democrats elected in government. What a strange thing to say. The executive order that nationalized the California National Guard applies to anywhere in the United States. It's not just LA, it's not just California. I think this resolution really, and false as it is serving as a predicate, as a foundation for the military to be used in places all over the United States at any pretext, so that the military can go in and assume civilian authority away from those who are democratically elected. That's why it's important that we do not approve this resolution with its false whereases, that we do not participate in a scheme to replace the democratically elected officials in cities and counties and states across the United States. I'll just end with this. Who should we be more concerned about? What should we be more afraid of? The gardeners that are being arrested by ICE, the busboys, the farm workers, or the concept that the administration may be taking the steps to replace with the military civil authority that has been duly elected around the United States. With that, Mr. Raskin, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. And the gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Just to make sure that we're dealing with the facts as they actually occurred, the assertion that LAPD had the situation under control, we all saw otherwise on our television sets, and the LAPD chief himself said that every person in Los Angeles should be disgusted by what occurred. The governor has himself in the past recognized the virtue of using the National Guard when you had situations that required reinforcement. This notion that somehow the president was taking over the state's law enforcement authority, the Ninth Circuit said otherwise unanimously, even a Biden-appointed judge saying this was the president was exercising his authority to prevent the disruption of the enforcement of federal law. As to this notion that the violence was largely confined to downtown LA, I can't agree with the assertion that it's somehow less objectionable to have violence occur within a concentrated area than on a more diffuse basis. And finally, this disparagement of our ICE officers for wearing masks. I think that this is outrageous. We have seen threats against our ICE officers absolutely skyrocket. And it's very ironic for folks that had no problem forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks all day in defiance of even the World Health Organization's guidelines, are now somehow objecting to federal officers who feel the need to do this in order to protect themselves and their family. I yield 4 minutes to the representative from California, Ms. Kim.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Representative Kiley, for yielding. I rise in strong support of House Resolution 516 to condemn the violent riots in Los Angeles this month, and I want to thank our brave law enforcement officers. And I appreciate the heated debate and the conversation, and I want to thank my colleague, Representative Kiley, for leading the groundwork for explaining what led to the events that occurred last month in Los Angeles, which explains that the federal agents were conducting immigration enforcement according to the law. Mr. Speaker, protecting public safety should not be controversial. This resolution, therefore, we made it very simple. It recognizes the right to assemble and protest peacefully, and it condemns unequivocally the violence perpetrated against federal, state, and local law enforcement. It calls on local and state elected leadership to work with the federal government and restore peace. And it expresses gratitude to our local, state, and federal law enforcement officers for bravely keeping our communities safe in the face of danger. That's what this is about. Do you stand with our law enforcement officers working to keep our communities safe and have the common sense to call out rioters who commit vandalism, violence, property damage, and other crimes in our streets? Mr. Speaker, like others in the chamber and many across this country, I am an immigrant who came here legally in pursuit of the opportunities that this country provides. I am proud to be an American, and I am paying it forward to keep the American dream alive for my children and grandchildren. Peaceful protests are a constitutional right. We all cherish that. And our communities should not be living in fear. But peaceful protests and freedom of assembly gave way to chaos in Los Angeles we witnessed a few weeks ago. We saw acts of arson, looting, property destruction, vandalism, blocking streets and highways, lighting cars on fire, shooting fireworks, throwing rocks at law enforcement vehicles, and even assaulting federal and local police officers. As a result, we saw more than 500 rioters were arrested, and at least a dozen LAPD officers were injured. Local and state leadership clearly could not contain the chaos. The riots have cost at least $30 million to pay overtime and repair property damages to city buildings. This doesn't include the small businesses and other private entities whose businesses fell victim to the destruction. We also know that the riots were enabled by California's soft-on-crime policies that have allowed for lawlessness and endangered public safety. Again, this resolution recognizes the right to assemble and protest peacefully, condemns the violence against law enforcement, and calls on local and state officers to work with the federal government to restore peace. And we want to thank our law enforcement. This is not controversial. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back to the gentleman from California. The gentleman reserves. Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm now happy to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from California, Representative Correa.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask, what happened? My hometown, Santa Ana, California, predominantly Hispanic Latino. Factory workers live there. Remember, we're the biggest manufacturing state in the union. Nearshoring, guess where it's happening? Largest ag state in the union. A lot of farm workers in my district. What happened? One day, we're going about our business in Santa Ana, Orange County. Masked federal agents start going into our neighborhoods, picking up hard-working neighbors. Oh yeah, you bet people were concerned, scared, and nervous. And a lot of people expressed their First Amendment right. We got the National Guard. Sheriff Don Barnes, Orange County Sheriff Don Barnes, did not call for the National Guard. Local police chiefs did not call for the National Guard. We get the National Guard. You know, President Trump promised to deport criminals, those with deportation orders, those here less than 2 years. But now it's hard workers, people that pay taxes, that are being picked up. Like 60% of those being picked up are now people without criminal records. Orange County, we didn't have any violence. We had masked officers coming into our neighborhoods. And you know, I bet President Trump would want to know what's going on Main Street. One of the constituents that just got picked up, I talked about a minute ago, Narciso Barranco, 25 years in the U.S., a gardener, a father of 3 Marines. We make movies of people like this. This gentleman is a hero. His family's a hero. Instead, he's in a nice holding facility in Los Angeles. But I'm hearing more stories coming, more Barranco-type families being broken up, military families being separated by their loved ones by ICE. I do not believe President Trump would want his legacy to be that he deported military family members like Mr. Barranco. Look, common sense here. This resolution is not prime time for a vote. A lot of inaccuracies. I'm going to ask my colleagues to vote no on this measure. Mr. Chairman, Speaker, I yield.
The gentleman from California yields back to the gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, I'm moved by the comments of the distinguished gentleman from California, and I wonder what our colleagues think the value is, other than of a purely political nature, to a resolution that purports to be honoring law enforcement when it's set up on a completely partisan basis. I wonder what the value of that is. I especially wonder about what the value of that is when the majority doesn't even stand by actual law when it comes to honoring law enforcement. Because this body, on March 15th, 2022, passed a resolution to put up a plaque, a simple plaque to honor the noble and brave police officers who battled for 4 or 5 hours to stop a violent riot and insurrection unleashed against this chamber and against the Senate in an attempt to overthrow a presidential election. And so we voted to erect a plaque in their honor. That was on March 15th, 2022. It was supposed to have been put up on March 15th, 2023. We're now more than 2 years overdue in honoring those police officers, 140 of whom were wounded, injured, disfigured, and many of them permanently disabled. And several lost their lives in the days to follow that atrocity attack on this body. There's a law which says put up the plaque, and Speaker Johnson and the majority will not put the plaque up, which is why when you walk in the House office buildings now, everywhere there are poster replicas of that plaque being put up. Now they want to pass a resolution deploring violence that took place thousands of miles away from here, and it's just a resolution, a hortatory resolution. They can't even get bipartisan support because, of course, they've got to set it up on a polemical partisan basis instead. What is the utility of that resolution when they won't even follow an actual law to honor police officers who put themselves between us and a bloodthirsty mob? And that's not a partisan point because the Republicans denounced it at that time as terrorism, as an attack on this institution, as intolerable, as unacceptable. And I'm happy to share with my colleague, who I know wasn't in Congress at the time, all of the statements made by Republican leaders at that time, begging Donald Trump to send in the National Guard, which he controlled because of the District of Columbia National Guard, and he didn't do it. He sat and he watched it, eating hamburgers or whatever in the White House on TV, ignoring all of the appeals to send the National Guard to come and defend Republican and Democratic members of Congress. And now we've got a law which says put the plaque up in honor of these officers, and they can't do it, but they want to bring a totally partisan resolution to the floor deploring violence thousands of miles away, and you've got members of Congress from California saying that they're not capturing what actually happened there. But no, it's got to be another opportunity for partisan division. Why? Why can't we honor law enforcement together and follow through on our word? I'll reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
As to the comments of my colleague from California, he set forth his view as to what the priority and the limitations ought to be when it comes to deportation policy. And he is, of course, acting appropriately in doing so. That is his right and his prerogative as a member of Congress, as it is for any citizen. This resolution does not have anything to do with the merits of his view. This resolution simply states that one should not use violence in order to advance that view. I would hope that this should be a principle we should be able to agree on a bipartisan basis. And as to my colleague from Maryland's claim that this resolution is somehow set up in a partisan way, nothing could be further from the truth. The resolution simply condemns acts of violence. We are opposed to sanctuary policies. We're opposed to putting a target on the back of our federal officers and, frankly, to defunding the police. And it's not our fault that those who have allowed this violence, who have promoted sanctuary policies, who have put a target on the back of our officers, who have called for the defunding of the police, all happen to belong to one party. I yield 3 minutes to my colleague from California, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, many Democrats in this House have called the LA riots peaceful, even while Americans watched with their own eyes as marauding mobs under foreign flags set cars on fire, threw concrete blocks at police, terrorized motorists, and vandalized and looted local shops. The Democrat vice mayor of Cudahy called on criminal street gangs to attack federal law enforcement. The Democrat mayor of Los Angeles said that for the riots to stop, the federal government had to stop enforcing federal immigration law. You just heard the same sentiment expressed on this floor a few minutes ago. The Democrat Newsom administration has paid millions of taxpayer dollars to one of the principal organizers of these riots. I have news for the Democrats. The doctrine of nullification died with the Confederacy. States are not permitted to obstruct the enforcement of federal law. In a humiliating slapdown of Mr. Newsom, even the notoriously liberal Ninth Circuit Court ruled that the president has clear authority to federalize the National Guard to restore order whenever state or local officials are derelict in their duty to protect the public and enforce the law. Now remember how all of this started. ICE agents attempted to execute court-ordered warrants on criminal illegal aliens. When a mob intervened, ICE called for local law enforcement. The mayor reportedly stopped them from responding, and the governor did nothing. Now, we saw during the George Floyd riots what happens when leftist officials refuse to counter violent mobs. American cities aflame, billions of dollars of damage, and 19 people killed. This resolution condemns the violence, but there is something far more sinister afoot that strikes at the very foundation of a constitutional republic: the rule of law. As Abraham Lincoln told the Democrats long ago, there is no grievance that is a fit object of redress by mob law. And this generation of Americans is taking note. I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields back to the gentleman from California.
I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to hear my colleague invoke Abraham Lincoln and the rejection of disunion, secession, and violent attack on the federal government. Neither of my colleagues who's on the floor has said a word explaining why they won't put the plaque up to honor hundreds and hundreds of police officers on the Capitol Police Force, on the Metropolitan Police Department and the Montgomery County Police throughout the region who came to defend us. Why won't they put the plaque up if they're really such big supporters of the police? That's a law. They just want to pass a resolution. Their resolution, of course, is completely political. One of their whereas clauses is, whereas California's leadership has prioritized protecting illegal immigrants and violent individuals over U.S. citizens. That's just defamation of the law enforcement officials in California. It is defamation against the governor of California, the mayor of Los Angeles, the sheriff in Los Angeles County, the chief of police in L.A., all of whom fought to put that violence down when riots broke out. Something Donald Trump never did when the riots broke out that he incited against us. And remember, he was impeached by this body for inciting a violent insurrection against us. So not only did he not do anything to defend us, he was the one who caused the whole chain of events that led to the deaths that took place that day, the violence that took place that day, and my colleague won't utter a word about it. He won't say a word about it. And, so all of the attempt to focus everybody over there is a distraction from the fact that they still, to this day, are defending what Donald Trump did with January 6th. And why? Because they also defend his lie that he won the 2020 presidential election, which he lost by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. So I don't know what the meaning of their totally partisan resolution is when they won't even stand by the law that it was signed into law by the president to put a plaque up, a simple plaque up honoring police officers who fought tooth and nail for hours against the most bloody, vicious, violent insurrectionist mob ever to attack the Capitol of the United States. I'm going to recognize the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu, for 2.5 minutes.
The lady from California is recognized, but before that, the chair would remind the body that members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The lady is recognized.
I rise in opposition to this extremely partisan resolution that seeks to legitimize President Trump's baseless attacks in Los Angeles and on our elected leaders, including Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass. This administration's mass ICE raids by masked agents that will not identify themselves have trampled on our rights and left our community shaken, but not defeated. The president manufactured a crisis in Los Angeles and then blamed our constituents for it. He induced ICE to terrorize our community, detaining hundreds of hardworking residents at places like Home Depot and car washes, including U.S. citizens like Job Garcia, a doctoral student in my district, the Claremont Graduate University, who was manhandled, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed. And for this, the president called in the National Guard and Marines? This resolution only gives credence to Trump's dangerous rhetoric. Instead, we should be considering the resolution introduced by California's Democratic delegation, which condemns anyone engaged in violation of the law, violence, or vandalism, but most importantly, stands up for our constitutional rights to due process and free expression, and shows our appreciation to local law enforcement for upholding public safety. Rather than feed into the president's cruelty, we are standing up for the communities we were elected to represent.
Well, and I thank the gentlelady.
So the gentlelady yields back to the gentleman. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentlelady for her excellent point. And the California delegation has advanced with Ms. Lofgren a truly bipartisan resolution that deplores all violence, because the political violence is getting out of control in America. We just had colleagues in Minnesota who were the subject of assassination attempts, and of course the former Speaker of the Minnesota House was killed along with her husband, and a state senator was wounded along with his wife. So we deplore all the political violence across the board, and we defend the right to speak. And we look for policies from the federal government that will not exacerbate conflict, but will reduce conflict. This resolution, far from being nonpartisan, as my distinguished colleague argues, in fact, attacks the governor of California, it attacks members of Congress, it attacks California leadership, it attacks the mainstream media. I mean, come on. We know the difference between what is a partisan gotcha resolution and a resolution that actually attempts to unify people around common values. I'll reserve.
The gentleman reserves, and members, for information, the minority party has 12 minutes left in debate. The majority party has 15 minutes left in debate. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this notion that the president manufactured a crisis is simply asking us not to believe our eyes. You've actually had members of Congress from California who said that there was no violence, even though we all saw on television cars being lit on fire, Molotov cocktails and bricks being thrown at officers. Among many other acts of violence, we had several officers who were injured during the process. And what did the president do? He asked our dedicated National Guard members to come in to protect federal property, to protect federal officers. To say that this somehow was what caused the crisis is not only completely at odds with the facts as we all witnessed them, but is incredibly offensive to our dedicated National Guard members who went there and have successfully managed to keep the peace. Now, as to my colleague from Maryland, who has now accused us of defamation with this cause, whereas California's leadership has prioritized protecting illegal immigrants and violent individuals over United States citizens, that is simply the very purpose of a sanctuary law, be it California's sanctuary state law or Los Angeles' sanctuary city law. The entire purpose of these laws, their explicit effect, is to provide special protection for those who have not only come into the country illegally, but have committed crimes. I'll give you an example of how sanctuary policies work in practice. We had a case not far from Sacramento, where there was an individual who was in police custody for assaulting a peace officer. He had been arrested, he was in custody. This was during the Biden administration, by the way. ICE saw that he was in custody, and they asked to take custody of him from the sheriff's office so that he could be deported. But the sheriff's office had to say no, sorry, we're not allowed to do that under the sanctuary state law. The next week, that man murdered his own 3 daughters as well as their chaperone, a horrific crime that never would have happened if not for California's sanctuary policies. And in a similar vein, many of the operations which ICE conducted in a targeted and standard way in LA would have been unnecessary if it were not for a sanctuary policy that forbade them from taking custody of these individuals within a custodial setting. So I would simply ask my colleague from Maryland, are we to take it from his remarks that he would support reversing the sanctuary policies that have caused so much harm in California and Los Angeles? I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague from California talks about defunding the police, and he might want to update his talking points, because look who's defunding the police. President Trump and the Republicans are defunding the police, and we know that because we debated it for hours on this floor. His Doge agents, back when Elon Musk was still in town before he got run out of town by somebody, Doge sent a guy into the Department of Justice who cut out an estimated $500 million in community project funding to police departments across America and victim rights organizations and others receiving those grants. And they've not been able to explain it. They didn't even know it was happening. But of course, they unleashed Doge on the Department of Justice, and hundreds of millions of dollars in state and local law enforcement, victim assistance, rape survivor organization grants. All of that was cut by them. And of course, they're also cutting more than $1 billion in law enforcement funding in the DOJ appropriation this year. So we don't need any lectures about defunding the police from people who are actively defunding the police and people who are refusing to follow the law in honoring the police. And my friend from California refuses to utter a word about that. Could somebody please explain why they're not following the law and putting a plaque up to honor the officers who came to save our lives? On January 6th, I'm honored to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from California and member of the Judiciary Committee, Ms. Kamlager-Love.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in fierce opposition to this performative and misleading resolution that reads like a cheap script treatment looking for a second-rate director. H.R. 516 is not about public safety. It is about fear. It is about scapegoating immigrants, and it is about gaslighting the American people into believing that Los Angeles is some so-called hellscape. If it is such a hellscape, I want to know why Republican members of Congress have been flying into Los Angeles over the past few weeks attending fundraisers. Nobody's showing up in a hazmat suit or in combat gear. So, if it is such a hellscape, pull back the cameras, release the drone footage so we can see what is happening across the entire city. This resolution ignores the fact that the violence didn't start in a vacuum. It was sparked by the Trump administration's provocative, aggressive immigration raids across the state. ICE agents were in neighborhoods, in grocery stores, at churches. You know, I've never seen a segment on TV about an MS-13 cartel boss in the 3rd grade. That's what we're seeing. And of course, we came out and protested. That is what democracy looks like. And of course, our communities are terrified across Los Angeles, across the state, across the country. But instead of listening to us, people from LA, the president escalated this drama, deploying the National Guard and the Marines to Los Angeles without a request from local law enforcement, the governor, or the mayor. Why? To launch a pathetic, made-for-TV reality TV show to justify authoritarian crackdowns and to divert from the real violence, the violence of cutting $880 billion from Medicaid, the violence of kicking people off of health care, the violence of tanking our economy into the gold toilet. That is what we should be talking about, and that is what this president doesn't want us to talk about. So he turned the cameras and the manufactured, fabricated violence onto Los Angeles. And then we have the audacity.
Just a moment. Does the gentleman wish to yield additional time?
Yes, an additional 30 seconds. Thank you.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And now this is audacity in blaming local leaders. This is about optics and power and control and stoking the ego of Republicans and King Daddy. We are tanking the California economy, the fourth largest economy in the world, largest donor state. I refuse to support this resolution, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back to the gentleman from Maryland.
We reserve. Thank you.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
This is really an odd notion that we've heard repeatedly, that the violence was only concentrated in part of LA and we needed to zoom in and look at the city as a whole. For the folks who had to deal with this chaos in downtown LA, it's a little comfort to them that things might have been more serene in Beverly Hills. My colleague from California uses the term hellscape for LA. I'm not sure I would use that term, but I can tell you LA has had a lot of problems, so much so that the sheriff's department even had to come out and tell folks, don't wear your jewelry when you go outside. Just put it on after you get to your destination. And as to the assertion that somehow this is a made-for-TV spectacle created by the president, ask yourself, what made for more sensational TV images? The Waymos being set on fire, the Molotov cocktails being thrown at officers, which is to say the things that happened before the National Guard got there, or our dedicated National Guard members standing outside federal buildings, making sure that no further damage to property and life occurred. I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
The gentleman from California has engaged in a spirited defense of the immigration policies of the administration. I wonder if he would clarify for us what the policy is this week, or at least today, with respect to agriculture in California or any other state, because President Trump heard from the Secretary of Agriculture and large agrarian interests saying that his immigration policies were destroying agriculture in America by getting rid of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who work there, and they're disrupting the entire agricultural economy. Then Donald Trump announced that there were some very fine, good workers within the agriculture sector, and they would not be enforcing the law there, and that lasted for several days. Then there was a reversal, and they went back to saying, yes, we will be doing ICE immigration crackdowns again. Then Donald Trump heard again from the agriculture secretary, as I understand it, and other interests, and he said, no, they would be leaving some of these people alone. I wonder if the gentleman could clarify that for us, and I wonder whether it causes him to second guess in any way his absolute support for these policies. Maybe it suggests there's something wrong with what they're doing, and the administration could go back to the drawing board. I yield 2 minutes to the very distinguished gentlelady from California, Representative Barragan.
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Ranking Member Raskin. I rise in opposition to this partisan and misleading resolution under consideration. We've heard our colleague distort the facts already through this debate. I want to remind the American people and everybody, it was local law enforcement that got the situation under control before the National Guard showed up, before the Marines showed up. I know because I was on the phone with sheriffs and I was on the phone with local law enforcement who said, no, we don't need anybody. The situation is under control. This resolution distorts the facts of what happened in Los Angeles. It falsely paints a picture of widespread chaos across Los Angeles to justify and legitimize Donald Trump's dangerous decision to deploy the National Guard and U.S. Marines on American soil, all without the consent of California's governor or a request from local law leaders and law enforcement. That's why I worked with Representative Zoe Lofgren to introduce a resolution that condemns violence, that supports peaceful protests, and sets the facts straight. Angelenos have exercised their First Amendment right to peacefully protest federal ICE raids that have terrorized our communities. Unfortunately, there have been a small handful of troublemakers who have taken to the streets to cause destruction and physical confrontation. They should be arrested and prosecuted, something that the governor, the mayor, and LA's congressional delegation have called for from the start. Let's remember, though, how we got here. What we've seen on our streets is chilling. Masked men in unmarked cars, no identification or badge, drawing weapons, swarming businesses and parks to indiscriminately stop, arrest, and detain immigrants and U.S. citizens. People are being stopped and detained because of the color of their skin. These are not violent criminals. The majority of the people have no criminal record. They're taking and leaving, they're taking the parents and they're leaving the kids stranded. They have baying grenades in crowds and sending those off. ICE is even arresting U.S. citizens based on how they look.
I would grant the gentlelady additional 30 seconds.
The gentlelady has an additional 30 seconds.
It is this conduct that's causing people to go out on the street and peacefully protest. President Trump's deployment of troops only escalated tensions and further unrest. Democrats have been clear. Anyone who committed violence must be held accountable. We must recognize that peaceful protests are patriotic. Deploying troops to silence dissent is not. This resolution ignores those facts to score political points. I urge a no vote, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields.
We reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
The assertion has been made repeatedly that the president's deployment of the Guard escalated tensions. We have seen zero evidence for that, and we all saw the images, the horrifying violence that was occurring before the Guard came in. I would also remind my colleagues who continue to assert that there was something untoward about the president deploying the Guard that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled otherwise. In a unanimous decision, the court analyzed the relevant statute, which provides that the president has the authority to make use of the Guard in order to stop the execution of federal law from being disrupted. And the judges looked at the facts on the ground and said when you have Molotov cocktails being thrown at officers, when you have a dumpster, a commercial dumpster being used as a battering ram in order to break into a federal office building's parking lot, when you have roadways being shut down, this looks a lot like there's a disruption of the ability to carry out the federal law. So again, not me saying this. This is a unanimous panel of Trump-appointed and Biden-appointed judges who came to that determination. And I'll happily answer the question of my friend from Maryland about what is the question when it comes to agriculture. Well, here's what the law says. The law says that coming into this country without authorization is illegal, categorically. And then it is within the discretion of the executive branch how to prioritize deportations. And across party lines, there has always been a strong focus on prioritizing those with criminal records. Beyond that, different presidents have chosen to exercise that discretion in different ways. For example, President Obama chose to deport millions of people during his time in office. And it's ultimately a matter of how the president chooses to carry out that policy. But here's the important point for purposes of today's debate. Whatever your views are on that matter, whether you favor deporting everyone in the country illegally, whether you favor deporting no one in the country illegally, you should not, you cannot, you absolutely must not use violence in order to advance that point of view. That is the principle at stake in today's debate, and to vote against this resolution is to countenance what happened, the horrifying events that we saw in my state. I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad we're getting somewhere in this debate. The gentleman concedes that it's within the discretion of the administration to decide where to target resources. I was just trying to find out where the administration is this week, because we're getting conflicting accounts of whether or not they're still targeting the farm workers, because we're getting reports from California, Texas, New Mexico, that entire farms are shut down because there have been ICE raids. The other workers are afraid to come to work, and they're begging the president to do something. He said we would stop doing that. Then they reversed it, I think, when Stephen Miller got involved, and now the agriculture interests again are getting involved. They should get the policy together. But it speaks to an underlying problem here, which is that the overwhelming number of arrests now are not of people who are criminal suspects for anything. 65% of the people who've been taken by ICE since this administration began had no criminal convictions at all. And that's why you read articles like in the Wall Street Journal about small rural towns that voted for Donald Trump that are up in arms, that are in an uproar because people who have done nothing wrong and are pillars of the community are being taken away from their workplaces, their farms, their restaurants, their businesses, in their homes. I'd also would like to ask the distinguished gentleman from California, whom I know to be a serious student of the law because he was a student of mine of the law when we were at Yale Law School together. What authorizes the government to send people out who are not identified with any law enforcement insignia, masked in unmarked cars to arrest people. Doesn't that set the people up for danger in America? That's what the assassins in Minnesota were doing. They showed up dressed like some kind of vague, like police person without any law enforcement insignia in an unmarked car. That sets us up for danger. Don't you think that the law enforcement norm is for people to know who police officers are so that they know they have to submit to their authority? I would happily yield I'll reserve and see whether my colleague would like to answer the question.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Well, if it's true that law enforcement is somehow never allowed to be in something other than their uniform, I think you have a lot of people who got tickets for running a stop sign when there was an unmarked car there who would be happy to hear that because they have now a new basis to challenge that. I think we are all aware that there are circumstances like when someone is undercover, when they're doing a stakeout, in which it doesn't make sense to identify yourself as an officer. Now, of course, that's neither here nor there because we've seen that in these very targeted operations, these folks are very clearly identified. And to the extent that some have chosen to not have their faces revealed, it's because we have seen the threats against ICE absolutely skyrocket over the last several months. And it's, again, quite ironic when you had folks on that side of the aisle who were all about masks in the most absurd of settings during the COVID years. We'd have people playing singles tennis or out on the ocean paddleboarding, and they're required to wear a mask. You'd have 2-year-olds having to wear masks all day when no other countries, did this. And yet now, when a federal officer undertaking dangerous activity, trying to do their jobs, yet facing threats, being doxxed, feeling like they and their family are at risk, chooses to take this protective measure, now you have a problem with it? I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Well, we have no further speakers. We're ready to close.
Does the gentleman wish to? The gentleman reserves at this time?
Yeah, I reserve at this time.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
I have no further speakers and wish to close. I reserve.
The gentleman also reserves, so the gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Masked agents in unmarked cars sent out violating people's due process rights, as the courts have found, including all the way up to the Supreme Court. They're arresting members of Congress. They're prosecuting members of Congress for doing their jobs. They federalized the state National Guard when the police in Los Angeles and the elected officials are doing their jobs. This is an authoritarian attack on constitutional democracy. We must get back to the rule of law, and if nothing else, the Republicans should put up the plaque they are committed to put up, honoring the police officers who defended American democracy, the Vice President of the United States, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and everybody in this room during the January 6th violent insurrection, which Donald Trump was impeached for having incited. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, what happened in LA put on stark display years of reckless and failed policies, starting with the millions of people who came across the border illegally during the Biden years, and then the sanctuary policies that California has enacted, not to mention the countless people who have been released from prison early thanks to reckless crime policies. But today's resolution is not about any of that. Today's resolution is about something much simpler, a notion that I would hope would be unobjectionable, that in this country, we settle our differences through reasoned arguments and debate, not through force and violence, that we make political decisions through elections and not through riots. I hope that this resolution will receive strong bipartisan support on the floor today, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. All time for debate has expired pursuant to House Resolution 530. The previous question is ordered on the resolution and the preamble. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those in favor opposed say no. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to.
I'd like to call for the
Is the gentleman requesting the yeas and nays?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.